Jeff Bezos is viewed by as many as the richest person to have ever walked the earth. However, there are many billionaires and even trillionaires that have come before him. That being said, it can be challenging to estimate the wealth of someone who was born in the 1400s or someone who owned a kingdom. But using the opinions of several different experts, a pretty clear list can be compiled. Today, we're going to take a look at the top 10 richest people of all time and see how they earned their wealth and what exactly they used it for. Number 10. William the Conqueror, $230 billion. When you have the word conqueror in your name, chances are you're going to have quite a few assets. William the Conqueror was born around 1028 and went on to become the first Norman king of England. His estimated fortune reached its height at around $230 billion, a little less than double Jeff Bezos' fortune. So how did he amass such a wealth? Well, his name gives that one away. As one did in England back in the heyday, William earned his fortune by pillaging pretty much everyone. He conquered England in 1066, a conquest that saw the loss of around 100,000 lives. When he was crowned king, he did several things that shifted England. He banned slavery and made everyone in England speak Franglish because he wasn't fluent in English. During his wealthy reign, he had over 500 castles built across England and Wales, and he became one of the largest landowners in England of all time. He was known to eat well and wear fine clothes, so much so that when he passed in 1087, his clothes and jewelry were immediately stripped from his body by looters, leaving him naked. Number 9. Osman Ali Khan, $236 billion. One of the most recent billionaires on our list, Osman Ali Khan was featured on the cover of Time magazine in 1937 as the world's richest person. The last ruler of the princely state in Hyderabad in India, his wealth was well known. So how wealthy was he exactly? Modern experts estimate that his wealth hovered around $236 billion, but the Guinness Book of World Records claimed that he was worth $750 billion. Unfortunately, we'll have to go with the experts on this one. That being said, Osman Ali Khan lived a life few of us could ever imagine. The Jacob diamond, which is the 5th biggest polished diamond in the world, was in his constant possession. One might assume he would set it on a ring, or a necklace, or a glass case. But Osman Ali Khan used the precious diamond as a paperweight in his office. But that wasn't the only jewel he owned. He owned a large collection of jewels, known as the Jewels of Nizams, that were passed down from ruler to ruler. This collection included 173 jewels, including 2,000 carats worth of emeralds, dozens of pearl-studded necklaces, buckles, earrings, crowns, armbands, and the Satalada, a necklace embedded with 465 pearls. Altogether, the jewels are estimated to be worth $2 billion, only a fraction of his immense wealth. Yet, despite owning such a wealth, living in a massive palace, owning 50 Rolls-Royce vehicles, and having 300 servants, Osman didn't always reflect his financial status. He was known to wear the same hat for nearly his entire life. He ate his food on a tin plate and was known to beg his guests to bum a cigarette. He was even known to knit his own socks. Over the course of his rule, he introduced electricity, airplanes, and railways to the district. He was also known for donating much of his wealth to educational institutions and religious institutions throughout India. Number 8. Nikolai Romanov, $300 billion. Russia has had its fair share of wealthy families, and the Romanovs are perhaps the most well-known. Unfortunately for them, their wealth is one of the reasons they were massacred. Nikolai Romanov, the last Tsar of Russia, was estimated to have around $300 billion to his name. He's viewed by many modern historians as a weak, incompetent leader, and historians weren't the only ones who felt that way. Nikolai was even credited himself saying, "I am not prepared to be a Tsar. I never wanted to be one. I know nothing of the business of ruling." However, his incompetence and reluctance to be a ruler doesn't mean he didn't enjoy his spoils. He had an annual salary of 200,000 rubles, with an additional 20,000 rubles to spend on clothes and miscellaneous items. However, he constantly overshot that $20,000 limit, often spending an additional 150,000 rubles. For reference, factory workers only earned 500 rubles per year, and high-ranking generals only made 5,000 rubles. His spending money was 40 times that of the annual salary of an average worker. So, what exactly did he spend all that money on. Pretty much anything he wanted. He regularly spent 20,000 rubles to have clothes and military uniforms custom made for himself. His wife also joined in on these shopping sprees. She was known to spend 40,000 rubles on extravagant jewelry. Then there are the events that Nikolai spent his money on. His coronation was the most expensive coronation in Russia's history. 24 tons of silver and gold tableware were brought to the event. A choir of 1,200 people were hired to serenade the couple. He loved to throw parties for his country and himself. On the 300th anniversary of the dynasty, he celebrated by pardoning all civil debts and had over 1.5 million gold, silver, and bronze medals made to commemorate the event. In addition, he mass-produced postal stamps, handkerchiefs, and mugs that celebrated the event. Basically, he sent everyone away with really expensive goodie bags. He was also known for eating extravagant meals and going on lavish trips. His kitchen was manned by 55 people and offered 3 levels of meals. The most simple still included a 4-course breakfast, 5-course lunch, and a 4-course dinner. The food was so upscale that the leftovers were served as delicacies at local restaurants. His trips were most often hunting trips. 50 crew members were brought to make the experience as luxury as possible, and that included painters who would paint scenes from the hunt. His annual hunting budget was equivalent to the yearly salary of 100 school teachers. If that's not extravagant wealth, well, I don't know what is. Number 7. Andrew Carnegie, $309 billion. When you think of wealthy American families, chances are the Carnegies come to mind. Andrew Carnegie was a steel magnate who went from working in a factory changing spools of thread to having a net worth of $309 billion. He started his early career working as a telegraph messenger. His success, hard work, and attention to detail led him becoming the superintendent of the Western Division of Pennsylvania Railroad by the time he was 24. His superiors at his jobs taught him about business and influenced his investing, which led him to investing a lot of money in the railroad industry right as it began to boom. After the Civil War, Carnegie left the railroad business and went on to develop several ironworks companies, namely Keystone Bridge Works and the Union Iron Works. He also launched the Carnegie Steel Company, which he sold to J.P. Morgan for an astounding $13 billion. His wealth was immense and well known, but he took a rather modern approach to using it. He wrote a book, The Gospel of Wealth, which discusses the wealthy's social responsibility. His most famous quote, "The man who dies rich dies disgraced," was also practiced by him. He donated the equivalent of $4.8 billion to charities and, upon his death, gave most of it away. He left his family with a small sum of his wealth and also left sizable amounts to his housekeeper, nurse, maid servant, and his butler. Number 6. Jacob Fugger, $400 billion. Jacob Fugger was one rich fugger. Jokes aside, Jacob Fugger was actually known as Jacob the Rich, and for good reason. He's estimated to have had a fortune of around $400 billion. Back in the good old 1400s, Jacob's parents earned their fortune trading textiles with Italy. When Jacob came of age, he started mining operations for silver, quicksilver, copper, and cinnabar. He had a talent for investing, and he often spread his wealth across many different industries, and it worked out pretty well for him. By the time he had truly made it, he was loaning money out to the Vatican. His money helped build many of the Vatican's buildings, including the Sistine Chapel. He was known to spend his money on some rather lavish things from time to time, and in a period of extreme wealth in Italy, that often meant building homes, art, and fine clothing. His wife greatly benefited from this. At one point in his life, he bought his wife 40,000 guilders worth of jewelry. His own home was 4 stories tall and was, at the time, a modern Renaissance building. There were water fountains and fireplaces in every single room. He was also quite a giver. He funded Fugare, which became the first low-income housing program in the world. There are 52 homes on the property that housed families in difficult situations. The yearly rent was 1 symbolic guilder, though the residences did have to pray for the Fugger family 3 times per day. Fugare is still standing with residents to this day, and they still only have to pay 1 guilder per year, which equals about 88 cents. There's no word on if they still have to pray for the family, however. Number 5. John D. Rockefeller, $400 billion. Good old Jeff may be the most wealthy American right now, but he's got a long way to go to beat the wealthiest American of all time. John D. Rockefeller. That name should sound familiar to you. The oil oil tycoon had a fortune of around $400 billion. He founded the Standard Oil Company in 1870, which began to skyrocket in value shortly after. At one point in time, Standard Oil Company controlled 90% of the oil in the United States. His personal wealth became so enormous that his fortune was 2% of the national economy. With all his money, Rockefeller lived an incredibly comfortable life. He owned houses across the United States. Most notably, he owned Kikuit, a 40-home room with views of New York City. The home took 6 years to complete and featured collections of Chinese ceramics and 20th century art. But the Kikuit home was just the beginning. The home was set on an estate that would come to be known as the Pocantico Estate. The estate covered 3,510 acres and included 75 houses, 70 roads, and 9-hole reversible golf course, outdoor swimming pools, several tennis courts, a full-sized bowling alley, billiard halls, and its own farm and gardens. Rockefeller wasn't well liked by much of the public, but as he aged, he really stepped his philanthropy game up. He donated 10% of his income yearly to charity. Number 4. Akbar I. Akbar I owned a massive empire in the 1500s, and he had quite a fortune too, estimated to have been around $500 billion, though some estimates say he was worth even more. As a direct descendant of Genghis Khan, he had ruling and conquering in his blood. He worked hard from the moment he took the throne to conquer as much territory as possible, tripling it in the size by the end of his rule. Known as the Mughal Empire, his reign stretched across India all the way into northern Afghanistan. He was most known for his religious tolerance, which was most unheard of in the time. Although he was Muslim, many of his closest advisors and the city leaders were Hindu. He took an active role in uniting the two religions and allowing individuals the freedom to choose. He was known for helping translate Hindu literature, and he even took an active role in Hindu festivals. Little is known about how his wealth was spent, but it is known that he had a lot of it. His empire controlled 25% of the world's GDP for years. His palace was said to have exquisite carvings, wall paintings, and extremely rare furniture. Number 3. Augustus Caesar. Julius Caesar may be more well known, but his heir, Augustus Caesar, was the rich one. He is the only confirmed trillionaire in history, owning a fifth of the wealth of the Roman Empire, which accounted for 30% of the world's GDP at the time. Most experts agree his fortune hovered around $4.3 trillion. On top of the wealth his position as emperor brought, much of his fortune came from inheritance. He inherited 75% of Julius Caesar's wealth, and while no one knows exactly how much that is, Julius was known to have left 300 sesterces to every Roman citizen upon his death. At the time, 300 sesterces was worth 4 months' wages, and that barely put a dent in his finances. But it wasn't just Julius who gave Augustus money. Several wealthy families were known to leave part of their estate to the emperor, hoping it would bring political safety to their own children. During his 40-year affluent reign, he doubles the size of the Roman Empire. He founded a standing army, police and fire services, a courier system, and roads, effectively bringing Rome into the modern age. During his life, he lived in a palace now known as the House of Augustus. The House of Augustus featured entire rooms dedicated to art and weapons. Mosaics were said to cover every floor, and frescoes were said to cover every wall. Upon his death, one of the last recorded things he said was, "I found Rome of clay. I leave it to you of marble." Indeed, his rule ushered in a 200-year era of peace and prosperity in the empire. Number 2. Shizong of Song. The runner-up for the most wealthy person in history is also one of the most mysterious on our list. Emperor Shizong of Song reigned from 1067 to 1085. Lucky for him, this was during an extremely affluent and prosperous era of China. They were the top makers of bronzeware in the world, and farmers were granted the rights to own their own property. The production of rice skyrocketed and became a staple of the economy, making them a commercial superpower. In addition to this, gunpowder, printing, and magnetic compasses were invented during this time. The Song dynasty was able to create the world's first paper money and also formed the world's first navy. The navy allowed them to defend their trade routes, which protected their products. With all this innovation, Emperor Shenzong controlled 30% of the global GDP, and with a highly centralized economy, Shizong had immense control over over the money. His wealth has been called immeasurable. Experts know it is trillions of dollars, but it's hard to pin down an exact amount. Much of his financial status is attributed to the fact that he formed and increased tax collection hundreds of years ahead of European governments. But even with his wealth, Zhejiang was known for being fairly giving. He is viewed as a forerunner of the modern welfare system. His policies actively improve the situations of the unemployed, the homeless, and the peasants. Number 1. The most wealthy person in the history of the world may be someone you've never heard of, but after this, you won't forget him. Mansa Musa controlled a fortune so vast, so extravagant, that modern historians cannot even fathom how much he truly had. He rode across Africa on zebras, carrying thousands of pounds of gold, and that was the equivalent of spare change to him. He became the ruler of the Mali Empire in the early 1300s, when his predecessor went missing, trying to find the end of the Atlantic Ocean. It's too bad his predecessor couldn't just stick to land, because he would have had a pretty incredible life. During Mansa Musa's rule, Europe was struggling immensely. Things like the Great Famine, Civil War, and a fun little thing called Black Death brought all the kingdoms of Europe to its knees. But Mali was doing fantastic. It was the world's largest producers of gold and salt, which were the two most important products at the time. Mansa Musa conquered 24 cities and their surrounding districts within the first few years of his rule, yet he remained distant from the rest of the world. Even in Egypt and the Middle East, little was known about him. But that all changed when Mansa Musa began his journey to Mecca. As a Muslim, the pilgrimage was an important part of his religion, but when you have that kind of money, you don't exactly have to rough it. His voyage to Mecca covered 4,000 miles, and he didn't go at it alone. He brought tens of thousands of soldiers, slaves, and heralds. Every single person wore Persian silk and carried gold staffs. The camels and horses carried hundreds of pounds of gold. There were at least 80 camels that carried between 50 to 300 pounds each. As he journeyed through Africa, he was a spectacle for all to see. He often spent frivolously in cities and even gave gold as gifts. Upon hearing he was approaching Cairo, Al-Nasir, the Sultan, ordered him to visit his palace. Mansa Musa refused, but finally agreed to go upon Al-Nasir's constant insistence. There was a moment of tension with Mansa Musa refused to kiss Al-Nasir's feet, which was a common gesture of respect at the time. He eventually conceded, and Al-Nasir offered him lodging for the night. His time in Cairo was one few could forget, but by the time he left, the streets were covered in gold, and the people were basking in the fortune he had given them. But unfortunately, giving the fortune became a problem. His gifts depreciated the value of metal, and it would take 12 years for the city of Cairo, Medina, and Mecca to financially recover. It is said on his long journey to Mecca that he funded a mosque being built every single Friday. Upon arriving in Mecca, he turned himself to his religion and studies for days at a time. When he returned home, he got to working on building palaces, mosques, and universities throughout his empire. He created Sankor Madrasa, a leading center and university. The university housed 1 million manuscripts, rivaling even that of the Library of Alexandria. Unfortunately, soon after Mansa Musa's death, the Empire of Mali began to fall. Constant civil war began to weaken the country, and its ability to trade began to diminish. By the 1600s, Mali was being invaded by European cities to exploit its resources, and the rest is history. So, there you have it, the 10 wealthiest people in history. Do you think Jeff Bezos will pass them? Let me know in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Oh, and turn on post notifications. As always, I'm Mr. Luxury. Pip pip to doodly do.